State Republican lawmakers unveiled more pieces of their shared revenue plan this week. Both Republicans and Democrats want to increase shared revenue, but this proposal faces a tough road to becoming law. The bill would increase funding for local governments, and it dictates how the funding should be used by those local governments. Democrats argue it comes with too many strings attached. Governor Tony Evers says he'll veto the bill if it reaches his desk.
The state must step up more than what I've seen. It's why I can't support the Republican plan as is, and frankly, I'll veto it in its entirety.
We tried to close those inequities that existed out there, all of the disparities, and then it was about giving everybody an increase, and what did that increase look like?
Republicans are moving unusually fast to get this bill approved. They want it passed in mid-May. Joining us here this week is Representative Tony Kurtz to talk about this new shared revenue plan. First off, thanks for joining us here.
No, thanks for having me, Lance.
So let's talk about the way the money will be distributed. Much of the money targeting smaller municipalities. Why focus on those smaller towns and cities?
Well, one of the things I heard, I have a very rural area, and if you look at Senator Mary Filskowski on the Senate side of the House, who's the lead on the Senate side, she represents a very large rural area as well. And you know, when the shared revenue formula was first developed, it really did kind of focus on larger metropolitan areas. And then obviously when it was frozen in 2004, cut again in 2009, and then in 2012, you know, those numbers were stagnant. And unfortunately, in my humble opinion, and in Senator Filskowski's humble opinion, it did disadvantage some of smaller communities. So our goal this time was to give everybody, at least a 10% increase, but also look at those communities, you know, like a lot of townships, a lot of smaller villages, and go ahead and give them a little bit bigger bump because they too have expenses, just like the larger cities and the larger municipalities. So that was some of our reasoning, was try to equalize those out.
Now, the bill details how this money would be used by local governments. Why narrow the use of this money instead of just letting local governments decide the best way to use it?
Well, and they can still do that, Lance, with their existing shared revenue number. We're not changing that. As a matter of fact, that number that municipalities that currently get, that too will be tied now with the increase in sales tax. So that is, if people want to call that money unrestricted. The new money, or the new supplemental aid, obviously we want to focus on, law enforcement, fire. EMS is something that we have heard just as an issue statewide. Also dispatch systems, your 911s, transportation, and infrastructure. And trust me, for townships, they will use this money very well, particularly to invest in roads. I just live outside of the beautiful area of the village of Waniwak. They're getting ready to work on a new water treatment place. This is something that they can use that money for that. So I from what we've talked to all the stakeholders, the Towns Association, County Association, League of Municipalities, all agree that all our municipalities and local governments can use that money in those areas. And let's be honest, it could possibly free up money in their current shared revenue where they could use elsewhere.
Now, the bill also allows Milwaukee County to implement a sales tax to help with their budget issues, but it comes with a lot of strings attached, like adding school resource officers. Now, Senator LaTanya Johnson said it was like holding a loaded gun to our heads in Milwaukee. Does this bill take political advantage of Milwaukee's budget issues?
I would say no, and the reason why I say that, this is something a good friend of mine who has left the Senate, his name was Dale Koanga. This is something Dale actually worked on last session. And then you have obviously new leadership in the city of Milwaukee with Mayor Johnson and David Crowley, who David Crowley and I actually served in the assembly together. You got new leadership in the county and the city. They've come to the table well over 6, 7, 8 months ago and said, you know what, we need some assistance. And so we are more than happy to help the city and the county to give them the ability to help themselves. But yes, there are a few things that we would like to see in return. And one thing that we have heard from all the legislators that represent that area, the suburbs, and some of the parts of Milwaukee County is the crime rate. And so one of the things we want to focus on is public safety. That's not just obviously police officers or school resource officers, but is also fire department. And so part of this money that the city would be able to referendum for, or the county, would go into public safety because unfortunately over time, due to their obligation to the pension and that unfunded liability that truly could bankrupt the city, they have cut police and fire. And our point is, what, we're going to help you, help yourself, but part of that deal is we really do want you to focus on, taking care of your pension, coming over to the Wisconsin retirement system for all the new hires, but also focusing more on public safety and reinforcing that aspect of public safety and also fire.
There's also provisions in this bill that would actually lower shared revenue if a municipality lowers funding or staffing for police, fire, or EMS. Now, some government leaders are concerned that they won't have the flexibility to handle budget issues if that is passed. What's your response?
Well, we're going to look at that. I mean, that was something yesterday, was brought up in the hearing this past week, and we'll look at that. But the goal in that, we just don't want municipalities to cut law enforcement, fire protection, EMS. That is our intention. Is we do not want them to cut those services. Part of that maintenance of effort, I know a lot of people are having some consternation with that, but the fact of the matter is you can choose 2 of the 4 of those. In addition is, as your population maybe increases or decrease, you're not tied to those each and every year. In other words, you can change those year to year based on the conditions of your municipality. So I think there's a little bit more flexibility in there than people think. And once again, this is something that we vetted with the Towns Association, the Wisconsin League, Wisconsin County Association, the League of Cities and Municipalities, and also all the police and sheriff organizations. So it's not something that we just pulled from the air. This is something where we had a lot of stakeholder input before we put that into the bill.
Well, another part of that same provision says that municipalities would have to maintain the number of citations and arrests from the previous year. And I know you've heard from local leaders who classify that as essentially a quota, which is against state law, isn't it?
And Lance, that's something that was brought up to us actually by a reporter the other day, and we are going to look at that. But once again, there's been a lot of scrutiny on this before we did put that out as a piece of legislation. But like I mentioned on the committee that this past week, I will be more than happy to look at that. That was not, I repeat, that was not the intention of the maintenance of effort. And so we are definitely open to looking at that. And if we need to make changes, I'll be happy to do that.
The governor has already vowed to veto this bill as it is written. So are you willing to make changes before it gets to his desk?
Well, and let's be clear. What he said was he would veto the bill in its entirety, in its current form. And I think Senator Fitzkowski and I made it pretty clear in the hearing last week that we are definitely open to amendments. There will be amendments. It was just a little disappointing because I know it was about a little over a week ago where the Speaker of the Assembly and the Majority Leader of the Senate actually had a very good meeting with the governor. This past Wednesday, my staff, the Speaker's staff, the Majority Leader staff, and the Governor's staff, once again, I heard had a very good, productive meeting. So, I mean, we are still moving forward. The bill that we put on the governor's desk will not be the bill that we are working on right now. There will be changes, and I think that's part of the process, and I think it's very healthy and very productive.
Representative Kurtz, we thank you so much for the time here this week.
Thanks for having me, Lance. Have a good day.